From the News Channel 5 Network, this is SportsLine.
Hey there, SportsLine on your television. Steve Layman here with you. Glad you are here with us on this Tuesday night on News Channel 5. Plus, we'll talk some Titans minicamp coming up tonight and tomorrow night right here on the program. But we're going to start tonight with Tennessee baseball and the disappointment from losing in the Super Regional to Notre Dame in Game 3 on Sunday afternoon. Our phone lines are open, 737-7767, if you'd like to chime in on this topic. Leave no mistake about it. Tennessee not getting to Omaha is one of the bigger disappointments that I can remember a sports team having. I mean, we think back to the Titans in January and being the #1 seed in the AFC and losing at home to the Bengals. That was an enormous disappointment. A lot of people were upset about that, and rightfully so, because that Titans team was the #1 seed. They had a path to get back to the Super Bowl for just the second time ever since the team has been here in Tennessee at home. They could have played the AFC Championship game at home if they could have just beaten the Bengals. And who knows what happens if you get to the Super Bowl. Could you win the franchise's first ever championship? But the NFL's full of parity and good quarterbacks and good teams, and the Bengals were hot. And frankly, whoever the Titans would have played the next week, it turned out that it was the Chiefs, but whether it was the Chiefs or the Bills, that would have been a heck of a slugfest against either of those teams to move on to the Super Bowl. And then you have had to have beat the Rams, who ultimately were the Super Bowl champions. And you have had to have beat them in their own stadium. So there's a lot of what-ifs that you have to play out there with the Titans. Big disappointment to lose, but it wasn't like had they won that game, oh my gosh, automatically they're going to be world champions. And you can't really necessarily do that with Tennessee baseball either, but it feels different. This was a team that had won 57 games, more than any team in Tennessee history. It was 2 wins away from matching the most wins by an SEC team. It was 3 wins away from being the first team since the 80s, when they didn't have a limit on the number of games you could play in a season, to win 60 games in a season. They had the potential to finish with fewer than 10 losses. They had the potential to have the fewest losses of any champion since the mid-90s. They had the most home runs. They had the most runs. They had the best ERA in the country. It was a team that was absolutely unequivocally loaded in a way that we've never really seen before in college baseball. And the way they ripped through the best conference in college baseball left no doubt about that. So the only question, would Tennessee be able to handle the pressure and the bullseye of being #1, not just of this year, but maybe of all time, entering the postseason? And the simple answer to that is no, they didn't. Tennessee was not very good the last 2 weekends, and certainly not very good against Notre Dame. Historically great for 65 games this season. Beaten in 2 out of 3 by the Fighting Irish on their home field. And that is an incredible, incredible disappointment. I said it on this program a couple of weeks ago after they won the SEC tournament, that you remember the season by what happens now. What you do when June comes around, and this Tennessee team was so good that anything short of a national championship would be considered a bust. And I don't think you can back off of that statement. It's not a failure. I don't like using that term because everything I just rattled off tells you how good the season was. And I'm well aware of the history of the NCAA baseball tournament. It is kind of a fluky event. Only one #1 seed has won it all since they've moved to this 64-team format and the way they did it back in 1999. Just one. 9 of them haven't gotten to Omaha. So Tennessee's got some good company in the disappointment of the #1 seed. But oftentimes the #1 seed isn't the clear-cut number one team. It's one of 4 or 5 teams that you can parse through the numbers and decide who ultimately gets that number one next to their name. That wasn't the case here. Tennessee was miles better than anybody else during the regular season, and again on the very short list of all-time great teams in college baseball. But to be an all-time great team in college baseball at the end of the day, you've got a dogpile in Omaha. And I said that 2 weeks ago. Tennessee was good enough to do it, and they should do it. But if they don't, you can't put them in that category. They cannot be an all-time great or the all-time best team if they don't go to Omaha and win it. And they didn't. So you got to remove them from that conversation. Just like you've got to take out the 2013 Vanderbilt team that was so good that didn't ultimately get to the College World Series. They lost in a Super Regional to Louisville. Just like you have to take out that David Price, Pedro Alvarez, Casey Weathers, incredible Vanderbilt team back in 2007. They got upset by Michigan in the regional. You got to take those teams out because ultimately they didn't do it. And whatever you look at the numbers on paper or the future professional baseball players, to be an all-time great team, you've got to be a champion. And this Tennessee team, as great as it was, for all the numbers and for all the accomplishments, the All-Americans, the SEC regular season and tournament championship in record-setting fashion, another regional title, they didn't get to Omaha. They not only didn't win the national championship, they didn't even get to the College World Series. They aren't one of the final 8. And oh, by the way, 4 of the 8 are from the SEC. And Tennessee played 2 of the other 4. This was a team that was meant for this, except they didn't get it done. And when you look out there and see a bunch of teams that they absolutely dominated during the course of the season in the SEC now competing to win a national championship, probably better than not odds that one of them wins the title, that is something that is very difficult to swallow. This Tennessee team had the chance to do something truly special, and they couldn't. And this weekend, again, it was clear they just weren't right from the start. They didn't play well in the regional, but they showed the mettle of how good they were, that when things went south, they just kept right with it. They didn't hit Campbell early in the game, but they kept right with it, and eventually they pulled away. They got behind Georgia Tech early in the game, but they stuck right with it and won that game in the 9th inning and never ended up losing a game in the regional. 3 straight wins and on to the Super, where they got it at home. But once again, they got down early against Notre Dame. Didn't get a great pitching performance from Blade Tidwell on Friday night. And the bats just really didn't come alive for them on Friday night. So they got themselves in a hole. They put their backs against the wall. They came out on Saturday like you'd expect. They got after Notre Dame's ace. They blitzed them with home runs, put up a bunch of runs, and went easily. And at that point, I think everybody just assumed it would be a coronation on Sunday. That Tennessee would just walk on the field and the Volunteers would take care of business against Notre Dame. And that's what it looked like early. Chase Burns was awesome. He was great on the mound. They got runs. Luke Lipsius homered, second batter of the game. Seth Stevenson with a couple of RBI hits. It's 3-1 into the 7th inning. It looked like Tennessee was in control, but they couldn't quite get the separation where you felt like, okay, this game is over. And you get to those later innings, and all of a sudden, the pressure builds when you're that number 1 team in the country, when you're that team that people are talking about amongst the all-time greats. Chase Burns goes out there, gets it out, man's on base, really the first runner on base for Notre Dame in more than 3 innings. He gets an 0-1 pitch to David Layman, a light-hitting Notre Dame player. Had just 1 home run all season. He was woefully late on a 94-mile-an-hour fastball on the outer half, but he got a piece of it. And he went down the line and right at Lindsey Nelson Stadium, which has maybe the shortest porch in college baseball, in right field. Short wall and only 320 feet away. And it was a home run. Just the 2nd of the year for Layman, and all of a sudden it was a tie game. And then I think Tony Vitello made a mistake to leave Chase Burns in for the next batter, because the air had been sucked out of the stadium at that point. It was a uh-oh, what just happened now type of feeling. And he stuck with Burns against Notre Dame's best player. Jack Brannigan made him pay with an absolute no-doubter to left that gave Notre Dame the lead. And that's when you felt like there was panic in the air. It was down to 9 outs. And Tennessee had to make something happen. And instead, for the first time all year, I think you really saw the pressure get to Tennessee. Errors, bad base running, not great at bats, not good relief pitching. And Notre Dame put up a 3-spot in the 8th as well. And at that point, it was pretty much over. And the final was 7-3, and it was Notre Dame dogpiling behind the mound at Lindsey Nelson Stadium instead of Tennessee getting set to go back to Omaha for a second consecutive year. And I'm not sure I've ever seen a stadium or a team as stunned as what we saw when that final out was made. Because no one in Knoxville believed that this team wouldn't get through that weekend. No one around the country did. Tennessee was that good. And to not get it done is just going to be the ultimate what if for those players, for Tony Vitello, and for Tennessee fans. Good season, a lot of great accomplishments, but to not get back to Omaha, to not have the shot to go win the first national championship in school history after this season, that's going to sting for a long, long time. And no one's going to sit there and feel sorry for Tennessee, because we've talked about this as well. This is a Tennessee team that played with a swagger, a quite literal at times screw you type of swagger. And they rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. There are a lot of baseball fans out there in the country and around the SEC that said that this Tennessee team took that stuff too far. And then maybe this weekend was about karma, the baseball gods getting back at them for their actions throughout the course of the year. They weren't going to let that slide, and that team win it all because they, quote-unquote, disrespected the game. I don't believe any of that. This isn't about karma. This isn't about anything that they did that came back to haunt them. But I will say this, and I haven't heard many people make this point. I think most people around sports, and we'll hear from Joe Rexrode coming up, believe that there's no karma to this, that there's no karma in sports. You get what you earn, you get what you deserve. And I think that's right. Where I differ from a lot of them is this. When you play with that bravado and you kind of rub it in your opponent's faces in the way that Tennessee did, it only builds the pressure. So they were the #1 seed in the country, the #1 team in the country. People were talking about them in this historical fashion against the all-time great teams already. And then you add in this fact that no one likes you because of your antics, and you continue to do it and kind of flaunt your nose and turn up and sort of say, come and beat us if you want to shut us up or if you want to stop us. That, to me, adds an extra weight. It doesn't automatically mean you lose. Somebody's still got to do it, but it adds an extra weight. And to me, that is a factor here, because when you look at Tennessee and the way they went through the regular season, and then, more importantly, the way they went down to Hoover, which is the postseason. It's a double elimination tournament just like this is. They went down to Hoover and they blitzed the rest of the conference, which again had 9 teams in the tournament and 4 of them make it to Omaha. Tennessee blitzed them in Hoover. The pressure certainly didn't get to them there. But then you get into this tournament where you truly talk about the historical ramifications. And everybody in the country is talking about Tennessee. And you've got the antics. You've got the bat flip of Drew Gilbert. You have Jordan Beck flipping the bird in the Georgia Tech game for whatever reason. You have Gilbert getting ejected on Friday night for what any player anywhere would get ejected for. Vociferously arguing a ball and strike call with foul language. You throw all that into the mix, you better win. And I do wonder if some of that played a factor here. That you just add on to the pressure that was already pretty intense. Because for whatever reason, after rolling through Hoover, in back-to-back weekends at home in the NCAA tournament, Tennessee didn't play well. It didn't look like the same team. The starting pitching wasn't as good. The defense wasn't anywhere close to the standard it had set throughout the course of the year. And while the bats were there, they weren't always there. And they didn't have the innings. A lot of times the home runs were solo shots. They didn't string together the massive inning like they so often did throughout the course of the year. It was just from top to bottom a totally different standard in the way Tennessee played. And it caught up with them. The first weekend they were able to survive because they were just better than the opponents in their way. But Notre Dame's good. And Notre Dame went toe-to-toe last year at the Dude against eventual national champion Mississippi State. Lost in Game 3 of a Super Regional. So they'd been in that position before, and they weren't going to back down. And Tennessee didn't live up to what it had to do and didn't live up to the standard that it made the entire season. And they will remember that forever because the opportunity in front of this team is not one that comes around very often. And look, Tony Vitello and Tennessee, they're not going anywhere. This is a program that's going to be good for a while. And they may very well win a national championship. But this was a golden or an orange opportunity. And Tennessee didn't make it count. And it's not always easy to get there. You look around the country at a lot of good programs that haven't had that success. Louisville's been to Omaha a bunch, hasn't won the national championship. Florida has been in that boat a bunch. And just until a couple years ago, hadn't won a national championship. Took Vanderbilt a long time. Those two teams I mentioned, 07 and 13, those teams were loaded. Neither one of them got to the College World Series. And that's the challenge for Tony Vitello now, is to somehow do at Tennessee what Tim Corbin did at Vanderbilt. That when you have some of these teams that are really good and loaded and don't live up to expectations, how do you keep it going the right direction where you just consistently put yourself in that position? The 2014 team was not as talented at Vanderbilt as the 2013 team was. It just wasn't from top to bottom. But that team put it all together in June and won the College World Series and Vanderbilt's first national championship. And that's the thing, is you've got to just put yourself in that position to do it and continue to be there. And I think Vitello will continue to make Tennessee good. It's just a question if you can be at that level year in and year out and continue to do it in the way a program like a Vanderbilt has. And that's the challenge. This was a chance to really put yourself in that discussion right here and right now. And Tennessee didn't get it done this weekend. And that will linger for a long, long time. 737-7767 is the number. When we come back, we will hear from the Vols, including head coach Tony Vitello. Also get Joe Rexroad's thoughts on this before we move on tonight. This is SportsLine on News Channel 5 Plus.